Before starting your install, you must first log the car's AC pressure either with HP Tuner's EFI Live or one of the phone apps like Talk Pro for Android phones or Dash Command for iPhones. You need to either be logging or watching the high side AC pressure, then go wide open throttle whilst driving on a dyno or a road, at which point the pressure should decrease and disengage the AC compressor. If it is a cold day, you may not see much of a decrease in pressure, but as long as it isn't increasing, then that's fine. We then know the AC compressor is turning off. If it is not turning off and the pressure is climbing, do not install the chiller. Take the car to be looked at by your dealer, an AC technician, or an auto electrician. It could be either the BCM or the solenoid on the compressor, as every car, no matter what make or model, should disengage the AC compressor at wide open throttle. Next, you should check to make sure the intercooler pump is running and circulating the intercooler fluid. Sometimes the best way to do this is to place your hand on the pump, if safe to do so of course, and have someone start the car and make sure it runs for a couple of minutes. If you have tuning software, engage the pump and make sure it runs on its own for a couple of minutes too. If it is switching off, generally it is from not being bled properly. You should fix this before starting your installation, diagnosing the car obviously, and making sure everything's working before you actually start the install. Now, some notes on what is not in this video. There are no details provided in regards to electrical wiring. We provide you with switches and solenoids. A qualified auto electrician should be wiring it up for you with a 15 amp inline fuse. We cannot provide these details as every car is different and we do not want to be liable for your incorrect installation. The intercooler pipe layer is 100% up to you how you route your hoses. You may have other or better ideas on how you want to route the hoses. Our instructions for the pipe work is simply a guide to help you. You could do it any number of ways and we provide enough elbows and clamps to give you that option. Okay, we're looking at the crash bar here on the VF. So this will suit all VF models. What we've done here is there's 4 channels, so you can see about there is where the channel divider is. So there's 2 channels there and 2 channels there. We want to be in the center, drilling a hole in the center of the top channel there and there. How we've come up with these markings is we've taken the chiller, located it there with its bolt holes, and roughly lined it up with its brackets. This one's all pre-drilled because we've already had it installed on the car, but this is just to show you. So this will be our bracket here going in on one side there, and then our other bracket on the other side. Now, after this point, obviously screw them on, make sure they're nice and tight. I'm not going to do it for the video, but make sure they're nice and firm. Then on the base of your chiller, the bolt holes, with the bolts, on the base of the chiller, get some grease and put a dab of grease on each bottom of the bolt, and then grab the chiller and push it hard up against the bar, compressing the insulation foam, and then dab it up on the brackets, and you'll get 2 witness marks for where obviously those holes are going to need to be drilled. So then you can drill those ones out. Okay, so now we've mounted the chiller, and we want to make sure that we mount this in the correct orientation because our lines are all cut to the right size. So the TX valve is here and it's on the front right hand side. Okay, so that'll be like that, just on the front right hand side when looking at the car. These water fittings, I like to turn this one, so you can actually turn them. There's enough thread tape in there to keep the seal nice, so obviously just make sure your insulation's still good, otherwise when you do run the system these will all ice up. I like to turn it so that it faces towards the hole that I've drilled there for it. Now this one in particular, because this was the first model that we did on this car, this was a test mule, we do actually like to mount this bracket here on that line a bit more flush. So this one's a little bit low, as you can see there. Still fine, but obviously it's a bit neater if you put your bracket flush with that lip. Okay, also on the VE models, the chiller isn't going to mount in this location. You are going to have to cut out the rear of the Rio and the underside just in basically the location of where the chiller is. The chiller will basically hang out about 15-20 mil out of the backside there. If you do have a windscreen washer bottle that is mounted there, you're obviously going to have to buy a different one, you know, like a VF style, mount it down there, or there are a couple of aftermarket options as well. Okay, we're now going to mount our dryer. This is the dryer here. On the top, if you see on the right hand side there, it's engraved in. That's the inlet side, obviously. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to see, but you can see that there. Also, if there is a sticker over that sight glass, make sure you pull the sticker off so you can see it. Now, this bracket, I've already pre-bent this bracket to suit, but I'll put it on the car and then I'll explain to you how to bend it yourself. Either you can do it beforehand in a vise, or you can actually do it on the car. Okay, so now for our dryer mounting, what I've done is I've taken the chiller off. I've eyeballed where I want the dryer and where I want the bracket. So I like to have the dryer sitting as low as possible. So I'm using the top hole on the bracket for my self tapper there, and basically I've eyeballed, you know, it's basically at this point, and you know, about there on the bar. I've drilled a 5 mil hole all the way through, and then I've used, you know, 7 mil self tapper screw to mount the dryer. Now for the bracket, if you haven't bent it in a vise, what you can do is grab a hold of, you know, the dryer might actually be sitting hard up against the heat exchanger. Basically the bracket's bent in a certain orientation from factory, so we need to bend that bracket to suit. So what you do is grab a hold of the dryer top and bottom with both hands and physically bend the bracket into place. It's not very difficult. Once you bend it in, it'll be nice. This one's obviously, you know, not mounted correctly at the moment as well. We'll tighten that up in a second. But what we also want to do is, if you have a look under there, see how it's sitting on there at the moment. We want it low, but we don't want it sitting on there. So we'll obviously just pull it up a touch and tighten it up to about there, so there's enough clearance. Okay, so now our dryer's mounted. Usually the way I like to do it is I like to have it, you know, pretty flush there with the top of the crash bar. So that mounts up really nicely. Now on the VE model, you don't have as much bracketry in the way, and it will actually, there's actually a bolt hole where your windscreen washer bottle was, and that bolt hole can actually be used for the bracket instead of having to drill one. Or if, you know, you're not happy with that, you can obviously just, like we did on this one, just drill a hole and mount the bracket. As you can see, the bracket is bent to the correct shape. The dryer isn't touching the heat exchanger, there's enough clearance, and obviously it's orientated straight with our in port on the right hand side. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to prepare our suction line. Now this one that I'm videoing here has already had the bolt trimmed, so I've just got that finger tight so I can show you. Basically, when you look at your car, you'll see the bolt will come out about, you know, another 10 mil past the head there. What you do is just grab a texter, mark where the bolt finishes when it's done up tight. Obviously this one's only got one thread, you know, left on it there, as you can see, so that was enough clearance. So even if you want to do it there, now you should be cutting it with a Dremel, because obviously it's a tight location. And what we'd normally do is, you know, get some rags, place them over everything there when you're doing it. Now I'll show you a trick with this which makes it a lot easier. You have to pay particular attention with the AC system. You never want to get any dirt in the AC system, and you also don't want the AC system open and exposed to moisture for very long either. So what we'll do is I'll undo this bolt. The system has been degassed, but it never gets all of it out, so there may be a little bit of pressure that'll be released. So what you do is you take the suction fitting. Alright, now I'll try and do this here on camera for you. With the suction fitting, what you want to do is take off the cap ends. Sorry. So I've taken off, the two cap ends. Now this washer here, obviously we can leave it on actually for this, for the purpose of this. So now what we're going to do though with these cap ends is, before we cut this bolt, we're going to we'll unplug it so we make sure we don't cut into that section of the bolt. We'll pull that off there, get that one out of the way. I'll do that one. We'll do that one first because obviously it's more exposed. So we put the cap end on there. That one's protected. Now we'll get that over here, put it out of the way. Now it's got its cap in there, so it's protected. So then we'll do the same for this one. We'll put the cap in on that one as well, and then we would cut the bolt with the Dremel. That way no sparks, no dirt or anything can get into the system while it's like that. Okay, so now you've trimmed the bolt obviously. We'll take our fitting, the new suction T-piece. We orientate it in this direction with the pilot nipple facing towards the firewall, and then we'll insert it in. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull off the first one and then pull off our second one. Now remembering that we have to use 2 O-rings, so what I'm doing right now is I'm just removing the O-ring from that white rubber cap, and we're going to put that on the fitting. Okay, so now we've got one on this side. This O-ring here, I've already replaced it, but that is what the second O-ring's for. So remove this O-ring right now, put a new one on that we supply you, and then you can put our fitting in. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to move that one out of the way. A little bit hard doing it with one hand obviously for the camera, but there we've got the first one in, and now we've got the second one in. And now what we're going to do first is the original bolt is we're going to put that back on and do it up. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to get it started because of the way you've cut the threads on the bolts. Also a bit difficult with one hand, but it'll go on any second now. There we go. Okay, so do that one up. I'm just going to do it finger tight for the video. Obviously do it up correctly. Then what we're going to do is grab the supplied bolt and nut which was attached to this fitting. Now we're going to undo the nut off the bolt, and we're going to slide the bolt in from this side. Obviously make sure it's all lined up. Then we're going to carefully pull the bolt back just a touch, that way we can slide our nut in, and then we're going to do it up. I might not be able to do this on camera with one hand, but basically I will put the nut in there, and then with 2 hands I will snug it up. Okay, so now that's on. We'll leave the blue cap in place because obviously we still want to protect the AC system from any dirt entering the system and protecting it from moisture. We always want to have the AC system open for the least amount of time as possible. So we've got that in now. We've got plenty of clearance between the 2 bolts, and we'll tighten them up with spanner and ratchet. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at our lines. They'll come to you orientated like this. The solenoid may or may not be connected depending on how we've boxed it up for you. So put the solenoid on, obviously make sure it's tight. If it's already on, double check to make sure that it is actually tight. Now with our CNC connections, these ones here, I'll just undo these for you. So you see on this connection we're running a washer on the bolt. So that's when we plug it into the original liquid line that goes to the cabin. Another washer will be on the other opposite male pilot, and the fitting will sit down square. So as an example, this would be the other male pilot, and then, you know, when they go together and you bolt them down, obviously they're going to sit nice and square. So what we're going to do is our male pilot end is going to be on this side. So this is the end that's going to go into the condenser, and our other end, so the second connection that goes back into the original liquid line, that's going to go there. This one here is the one that's going to go to our dryer. So I'll put these connections on and then we'll have a look. Okay, so we've mounted it now, the CNC connection on there. Obviously we want this one to be at a 45 downward angle. That's the one with the pilot nipple. Now if our T-piece here is not orientated in the right way, only with your hands, don't use any tools, you can grab the fittings and turn them. You'd have to be quite firm, but obviously you can turn them, turn the hoses before installation, so you can get all your hoses to sit nice and neat. Now this fitting here, if that's not fitting flush when we put it on the car, like it's sitting nicely on the car, we can also turn the hoses on the fittings. The hoses are lubricated on the fittings at this point, so it is still quite easy to turn the hoses. Alright, so now we're going to undo this fitting here. You can either take off this funnel if it's in the way, or you can simply just bend it out of the way, chuck your ratchet spanner on there. This one's already undone, so what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and take that off. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to unclip it from there, and I'm actually going to slide it back, all the way back behind the bracket of the windscreen washer bottle, and then put the fitting back there. While it's like that, you can get one of the red caps from your lines and put that over the end there so you can keep it clean. Okay, so we'll just get that one out of the way. I had this red cap on this one as well to keep this one clean and, you know, free of dirt. If you need to blow through them, don't use your mouth, use compressed air. So what we're going to do is we're going to put that one in. So that's our first one. We're going to use the original nut that was on there. I'm just going to finger tighten that up for now, just for the video. Okay, so now that's tight. Now what we're going to do is we've got our washer on the bolt still. Just make sure that those threads are nice and clean. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to pull that cap off. We're then going to slide it through. We're still making sure we've got a washer on the other male pilot, like I explained before. So now there's one washer on the bolt and one washer on the male pilot, so that way it spaces the CNC fitting down evenly. And then we're going to go ahead and tighten that up there. Now with the rubber hose, the factory rubber hose, you want to make sure it's not kinked in any way, and once it's all on, it's going to sit, basically we're going to push it to the back there and it's going to sit like that. As I explained before, if you need to rotate these hoses, you just grab them, you know, you can turn the hose until it sits nice and square. So now this hose here, the one coming off the T, we're going to put that through to our dryer. So I've already obviously drilled these holes previously, so what we'll do is, still with the cap on the hose, I'm going to shove it through and then run it up to the dryer. Now we want to make sure that that's a nice orientation on the hose. You don't want the hose to kink in any way, you want it to be nice and flat like that. So now if we come around here to the dryer, I'll mount this up in a second and then we'll show you how we want that to be. Okay, so we're about to plug this into the dryer. Obviously make sure that the O-ring is still on there. When you pull the red cap off, sometimes it can pull the O-ring off. Also on the dryer, there's a little rubber bung in there as well. So when you take that off, make sure that you get that as well. So, and we're going to carefully, put the hose in, and then we're going to nip it up again. I'll just do it finger tight for the video. Okay, so that's done up there. And what we want to do down here is want our hoses to route nice and neat. So what you want to do is just turn the hose. See, I'm turning it, and I'm orientating it how I want it to flow, so that it sits nicely on the car. Okay, for this hose, this one suits the VF, so it's obviously got a 90 and a straight. The VE model will actually have 2 straight fittings on it. Our straight fitting on the VF and the VE, obviously, because the VE is straight on both ends. We want to go into the dryer there, and then we're going to obviously turn down and come into the front, down here on the TX valve. Yep. Okay, we've now obviously screwed on to our TX valve there. Again, making sure we keep everything clean, nice and free of dirt. Make sure it's a nice and tight connection. Obviously there's going to be quite a high pressure running through there. And again on here as well. Now if your hose, again, is not sitting right in any way, you can grab the hose and turn it on the fitting. It's still lubricated in there. Until the system's run for a few hours, you can still turn these hoses at the moment. So at the moment that's on there and it's all sitting quite nice. Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to put the suction line on. There's one large end and one small end. The large end is going to go to our suction T fitting, and the smaller end is going to go to the chiller. Now what we're going to do is we mount it on this side of the washer bottle. So I'm going to feed it down through there on that side so it comes out the bottom. Alright, so our suction hoses come through on the inside of the washer bottle there, and what we're going to do now is take our fitting, still with the rubber cap in place. We've obviously cut the hole on that size to the right size, and then we're going to slide it all the way through. We want to go behind our TX valve, and we're going to come up and we're going to bolt it onto there. Okay, so now we've got our suction hose installed, and what we've done here is the sensor bulb, we've clamped it to the hose. Now if you have a look, the bulb, the entire coil of the bulb is in contact beyond this lip, and it's towards the top of the fitting. The higher it is, the better, because oil can sit in the bottom and then give false readings. This is your temperature sensor probe for the TX valve. So that's on there now. The hoses, I've obviously twisted them to make sure they route nice and neatly. Again, that one's on the inside of the washer bottle spout, and then you actually have a look on this side, it's there. When you have your aftermarket intake, etc., Harrop intake or whatever you're running, you pull the hose back like that and it'll clear. Now this hose here runs hot, so what we do is we cable tie it here. This is the suction line still, cable tie it there, and keep the other fitting nice and straight, coming out in that direction. Now on the VE, it will actually mount slightly differently. You'll have to go under. You won't be able to come through on this way because there's a few more things in the way down there, but you'll be able to figure that out easy enough. Okay, after you've finished mounting your sensor bulb, what you want to do is grab the black tacky tape and thoroughly insulate the sensor bulb, so that way it's not affected by any outside heat. Just push it on and then firmly squash it all down. Make sure it's also nice and snug up on the chiller. If you don't do this, it'll turn into ice. That section there, if you have any leftover tacky tape, you can also put it on that. It's not necessary, that part will run hot, so it won't actually form any ice on it. Your other option is to just get a can of matte black, obviously put some newspaper underneath, and then, you know, give it a quick spray matte black, and then you won't see it. So basically that's it now for the AC system. Our AC side of things is completely installed. So we'll just go over everything. We're obviously plugging in there with our first connection. It's coming down to our T-piece. You know, we've turned the hose so it sits nicely and goes up and through into the dryer there, out of the dryer down into the TX valve, on the other side, exiting the T on the other side, going to our solenoid, and at the back there is our original liquid line that originally plugged into the condenser. And that hose is, if you can see, mounted up there. The one on the right, it's not kinked in any way, it's nice and out of the way. The suction side of things, obviously we're going from here through there. You don't need 3 holes. We had a different system on this car previously, only need 2 holes. Then we're going up inside of the washer bottle and down to our suction fitting. Obviously we cut that bolt previously that you saw before to make sure the suction fitting fits. That's it. The AC side is now installed and completed. Okay, we're going to look at the bypass valve now. You'll see that it's got these clear hose sleeves on the ports. That's because these ports are 5/8 inch ports. We're using 3/4 inch hose on the car, so we're using these sleeves as a sleeve, so basically that we can, you know, put the hoses on correctly and there won't be any leaks. So we're doing it like that, and then it'll seal up nicely. Usually we try and mount them, you know, somewhere out of the way. It's entirely up to you where you sort of mount it. We find, you know, locations down the front like this is obviously best. It's you know, out of the way. Okay, for our intercooler pipe work, we're running the reservoir on this car. So what we've done is, you can see this foam insulation. You can buy this from Clark Rubber and Bunnings, Masters, you know, various hardware stores. Run some insulation on there so it protects it. Our hose obviously goes through the guard, comes out here, goes to the intercooler pump. We then leave the standard original hose. This is the original hose on the pump. Again, we're foam insulating that one. You don't have to if you don't want to, but you can if you want to. That then runs under the front dam here, comes into the bypass valve here. So that's on the intercooler pump going in there. This one here is going to the chiller. Again, we've insulated that there. And obviously here, this is the inlet side, which is on the left here. Now, this line here, we're constantly bypassing the heat exchanger usually. So we haven't bothered insulating that hose because it's not going to condensate in any way anyway, because we're just never going to use it. So that'll run there. We've radiused the hose, run it up underneath, and then put a little bit of foam there just to protect it from these, you know, T-piece clamps. We've cable tied it to here as well, just to keep all that pushed back when the bar does go on. Here on the sharp edge, we've dremeled that down. Then we've also cut a piece of rubber hose in half, made it there so that protects it, and then 90-degree fitting into the heat exchanger. On the opposite side, again, 90-degree fitting, followed out, rubber hose there again, cutting half, cable tied on so it protects the hose, dremeled off the edges, radiused down into the top port on the bypass valve. Then this side coming out of the heat exchanger, back here, and going into the standard hose that was originally going to the heat exchanger. That then obviously routes up as per normal to the heat exchanger, to the intercooler in the top of the supercharger. Okay, for our bypass valve, what you want to do is tee in here into this vacuum port. on some of the newer models, that vacuum port will just have a blank on there. Otherwise, you know, we made up this little, cut that little bit of hose and put into the original vacuum. That's actually the vacuum for the bimodal exhaust. This car's been wired up a long time ago, so we've done it this direction and down to a solenoid on the passenger side. We actually recommend doing it the other way because it is a lot neater that way, but I'll show you this one anyway. So the vacuum basically runs down to here to our vacuum solenoid. Now we are cable tying it there because that does look like an obvious spot to put it, but the bar does actually make contact and will break it. Now what you want to do on this side is obviously we'd normally cable tie the solenoid to here. This is where we would normally recommend you put it. The hoses that we supply are cut to these dimensions for you to put it in this location. So put it on this one. It's just this car's different because you know, it's the test mule car. Now underneath the bypass valve is where it plugs into there. Now what you want to do as well is this pin on the top, once you start the car, flick your should be your green switch, the green LED, and make sure that this pin is sucking in when you switch the switch on, and then coming back up when you turn it off. Don't muck around with it too much like that. But yeah, that's how it works. So at the moment there's no vacuum, so the pin's up. When there's vacuum, you test the system with the car running, turn the switch on, and then that'll compress down like that. That way you know that your bypass valve is working. Okay, if you've installed one of our reservoirs, the easiest way to bleed the system is obviously unscrew the cap first, and when you pour the coolant into the tank, pour it really slowly. Obviously the hose down here has a slight riser to it, and then going into the pump you can get an airlock in that hose. So if you pour the coolant in really slowly, you'll hopefully won't get that airlock in the system there. If you do get an airlock, just loosen off, you know, your first clamp fitting there, and you'll pull it back and just hear the air go and escape out. Now if you don't have a reservoir, the easiest way to fill the car is to take both hoses off the supercharger, hold this one up high and the bottom one here, hold it here, put a funnel in this hose and keep filling it and jiggling it until you get coolant to come out of this side here. Then put your funnel in there, plug the hoses back in. That will still take you about an hour to bleed the system, even if you're overriding the system with HP tuners or EFI Live. With the reservoir, once the airlock's been released, you'll have the system bled in 3 minutes. From factory, they really should come with a reservoir. It obviously does make a big difference for cooling as well, but that will be the easiest way to bleed it. It literally does take an hour to bleed the system properly without a reservoir. Okay, one of the final things you need to do now is cut the foam out. Obviously, lay the foam or plastic cupping, whichever one it is, onto the car, mark out where the chiller is, cut that section out, and then depending on how you've routed your hoses, you may also need to cut out those sections there as well, on both sides. So this section here for where the hoses are routing, and then that's it. Put it all back together. Alright, when your install is finished and you're ready to recharge the car's AC system, you need to add 80 ml of AC oil. The car should then be vacuumed for 45 minutes, after which point the gauges should be closed and left closed for 15 minutes to ensure the vacuum is being held and there are no gas leaks. If you have leaks, you haven't completed the installation properly and will need to recheck your fittings. We then generally advise a base charge of 900 grams of R134A, then add more gas until you get your sight glass on the dryer clear and free of bubbles. Then open up your cabin and do the same for the bubbles again. So first off you'll be doing the chiller, then you'll be doing the cabin. Continue to add more gas until you hit the desired pressure for that particular day's temperature versus humidity after clearing the bubbles. You should also note that you should be using stock AC and engine coolant temp fan settings, as this will affect the pressures. Generally when running chiller only, we try to target 10 psi above the target pressure for a given day, as the thermal transfer in the chiller is so high it does raise the pressure of the gas. You should also ignore the low side pressure readings, as generally when running chiller only, no gas passes the measuring point, or when running cabin and chiller, only 50% of the gas passes the measuring point. So the high side pressure is what you should be concerned with and referencing. We also prefer, when possible, to be looking at the high side pressure on the ECU, as this is more accurate than the analog gauges. If you have any difficulty during your install, do not hesitate to call or email for assistance.